Hi everyone!
Welcome.
We're back!
Welcome to the first episode of season 2 of Can We Discuss with Yara and Petra.
Today we're joined by a very special guest and a very dear friend, Shirina El Gallal. Shirina is an SLP speech language pathologist, and we're so excited to dive deeper into what she does, understand her world. Her backstory is so interesting, you guys. I'm sure you're all going to relate and really love like what led her to become an SLP. I know when she told me her story, I was really inspired by everything that she does, like how far she's gotten as well. So I'm so excited for you all to get to know her and fall in love with her like I have. One more thing to add about Shirina also is Shirina, first of all, outside of her being my first guest here stateside, which is so exciting, she is also Libyan Egyptian. So she also comes from the Middle East. And I think that's what we thought would work great on the podcast because a lot of our listeners are based in the Middle East and they can really relate to kind of your experience in both worlds. So tell us a little bit about your journey that led to you becoming a speech language pathologist and what a speech pathologist actually does.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me, Yara and Petra. My name is Shirina. I was born in Boston, raised in Egypt, but I'm originally from Libya. I actually stuttered severely as a child, and we went to so many therapists in Egypt, and it was just really awkward and weird. And I don't think that anyone was really able to help me. So it wasn't until like sixth, seventh grade where my mom found a fluency program here in Boston. So we came here for like months. I did therapy, and it was life changing for me just because I was such an outgoing social person, but I was hiding like behind this little wall of me not being able to like express myself or joke or even defend myself. So once I was done with college, I felt like I needed like one more thing, and it just made sense for me to like learn the whole field and understand how I can bring back to the community in Egypt or like all around the Middle East to just kind of help people who had my issue, because I was really kind of hiding behind something that wasn't me, and it was really hard to be me.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit, like, what does a language pathologist actually do? Like, explain it a little bit.
Yeah, so I always say that term doesn't really do our field justice. So my master's was in communication disorders, but our umbrella stems from articulation disorders to speech delay to dyslexia, language, voice therapy, resonance. So if you have a cleft or have issues with where you're resonating, and feeding and swallowing, we also tap into cognitive like attention, memory, therapy, and we also really help people find the best way to communicate. So that could be sign language, it could be with a tool, an app, pictures. So we really stem beyond just speech and language. And like people, whenever they hear what I do, they always think I just treat lisps, but it stems way beyond that.
Janina, it also has something to do with feeding and food development or eating development as well, right? To a certain degree.
Yeah, so although I started being a therapist for stuttering, I'm actually a feeding and swallowing specialist now at a
Okay.
children's hospital. So, because we know so much about this area, we specialize in dysphagia, which is swallowing and feeding disorders. And it's really a topic I'm very passionate about. You're right.
Can we
Okay.
take it a step back? Like, I would love to understand what it was like to grow up with a stutter. I know you touched a little bit about you, but kind of like tell me what it meant specifically growing up in the Middle East and also like how did it impact your self-esteem and social interaction?
Yeah. Um, it was rough, honestly. So I was raised in Saudi for the first 4 or 5 years. So I was in a compound. I was very cared for, hiding. Like I had a magical childhood. But then when we had to go back to Cairo and started school, it was almost like a rude awakening of like, I almost had to learn to be street smart really fast. But then I started realizing that there's an issue when I speak, I stop, I block, I repeat. I get really anxious when I have to open my mouth. So it was really hard. I was definitely bullied. I was made fun of. People asked me, "Inti li għandek zoghota?" Like, oh, do you have the hiccups? And there was just like no awareness on the issue at all. My mom knew what I had because like it is paternal, so she's seen some of my uncles or some like have some of it, but most men overcome it on their own. So it was really tough. And then seeing the form of therapy that I had gone through, like now in hindsight, it's kind of shocking that this is what people assumed was gonna cure me. I just felt more and more segregated from being normal.
And how do you think, I mean, I want to know a bit about what therapy didn't work for you as a kid. Do you think this is a sort of therapy that's still ongoing to this day in the Middle East? And what eventually actually worked for you? Like, how did you overcome the stutter?
So I know from experience now and just meeting people in the field, I know Saudi Arabia, especially Riyadh, does a really good job keeping up to
Interesting.
date with evidence-based practices and therapy. So I really commend their work. I'm not really sure what's happening in Egypt right now, but I know that I get a lot of consults through Zoom to ask about their 2 year old or whatnot in regard to therapy. I think for me, having like the methodology might have been not very functional back in the day, that it was really hard to carry over the exercises to my natural world. But once I did the fluency program here, which changed my life, the first thing we did was just accept it. Like, okay, people speak fast, people speak slow, people stutter. It's just one more added thing that you just need to work on, and that it's super manageable. You're normal. You're not like, oh my God. And and then we worked on eye contact, and then we worked on our breathing. So it's a very holistic approach where they put in mind that there is anxiety, there is different brain connections and a lack of like a specific thing. So it was like I was able to control my confidence first, my acceptance, my breathing, and then I was able to like use those strategies that I learned to slow down my speech, feel my first sounds, and just understand why I stutter and how to manage it.
Okay. So it kind of was an approach as well that made you look internally, try to understand the issue for yourself and before you just dive into solving it.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you now, like stuttering is still a big question mark in our field, and a lot of research is being done by scientists and neurologists, and there's a lot of new evidence about it. But I think it's very important to know the root of the problem as opposed to just the symptoms. So for me, as a extremely curious person, it just made me more aware of my body, knowing what was happening and being able to manage it. Like I don't say that I used to stutter, like I'm still someone who does, but I definitely have mastered the techniques and the strategies to be able to be more fluent. But there are times if I'm super frustrated or super nervous, it'll happen here and there. But I was severe.
There's something that you said that I actually really loved, which is part of the therapy, and like the first step was really acceptance. And I think that that's like a major thing, especially in the Middle East and like with our culture. It's like sometimes it's hard for parents to accept that there might be something not wrong, but like something that their child
Different.
needs to work on. Yeah,
Yeah.
that your child is not perfect, right? Versus here, a lot of the times, it's like here, as in like stateside, I feel they are able to love the imperfections and acknowledge the imperfections early enough to be a resource and to be able to help the child. Versus there in the Middle East, it's a little bit more like, I don't like to, it's not taboo is not the right word, but it's like a fear almost.
Yeah.
So have do you see that? Have you seen that in the Middle East? Like with, I know you have some patients back there, or at least they consult with you. Do you see the
Yeah.
difference?
Yeah, I think the difference is awareness. Like, I think the role of speech therapy or the idea of stuttering is very under exposed in the Middle East. So I think if we
Hmm.
just raise more awareness and make people understand what it is and how like how easily it could be managed, people won't be so afraid of it. I think it's like, anything you hear for the first time becomes scary. Oh my god, I don't know what to do, I feel sorry for my son. Like, yeah, of course it's sad, it's hard, but there are so many things you can do. So my part, what I'm hoping to do, is raise more awareness on speech therapy or speech issues that may arise in any child, and just normalize it and desensitize people to the idea that, like, it's not as big of a deal as you may think, you know
Yeah.
And when you bring more awareness to it, I would just assume that you start bringing earlier detection, right? Why do you think it would be crucial to have early detection when it comes to speech, language, or feeding difficulties?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, like in America, we have something called early intervention, and it just seems that through research, the child absorbs so much from 0 to 3, and it really sets
Okay.
them up for success in school. And there's just such a strong foundation that I always say, like, do more then, and then wean off as you think is necessary.
Okay.
Stuttering is tricky because a lot of it is going to be play based and modeling, and it's more to do with the
Mm.
parents' reaction to the kid. Because a lot of it, some kids will stutter as they're like developing language. Some people hesitate and they assume it's stuttering. So you have to just prime the environment externally to just make them work through it and learn some of the habits right away, so that their automatic way of speaking is slower, it's calmer. Because usually kids who actually have like developmental stuttering have like increased anxiety, or are sensitive, or have like the part of the brain that triggers speech coordination is also related to validation and recognition. So they always need a little extra validation, like, did you understand what I said? Did what I say interest you? Is it right? So just understanding the whole thing as like a holistic approach, again, as I was saying, is very important. So I always say, like, from 0 to 3, if there's anything you think they need, do more. And here it's
Okay.
free, it's the right, it's the law. And just ask. I know in Egypt, yani, there's always this like, لا لا ما تخافيش, لا لا حلو قوي, or he's just a shy person, that's why he's not
Yeah.
speaking. Or a teacher would say, like, your son is so polite, he says nothing in class, he's always quiet. Like, no, that's an issue. Like, being polite
Or they'll
doesn't
just
mean you have
wait
to.
another, it'll come to them as they grow older. Like they just
Yeah, لا
ignore it until a later age,
مدلع.
basically. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, no, and I always say, like, to my mommies at work, like, if you have a gut feeling something's off, do
Then
something.
something's off. Yeah.
Something is off. Like, you know your child more than me, more than the best doctor. If you think intuitively something's off, do something about it
Address it.
until you get validation. Like, okay, this is what we see, like, I acknowledge this, but I see 1 2 3 4, and someone will make you feel better and like help you understand the situation a little more.
Do you think with parents and caregivers, it would be easier for them to try to solve or try to help their child before taking them to a professional? Or do you think the first step should actually be taking them to a professional to learn what they can do at home?
I think, when you're young, you should have like frequent visits with the pediatrician. So it's really up to the pediatrician to decide when it's time. It's
Okay.
not easy to access therapy and rehab. And in some places, it's so expensive. And in some places, if it's not warranted, it's not covered. It's very
Yeah.
different. But I think, I have good relations with a lot of the pediatricians in my area that if they're like hesitant, they'll be like, hey, I have this kid, like, do you think he should see you or not? So I would just bring it up to the pediatrician so that if they feel like it's time, then they could help them.
And I feel like it's a little bit too of like the parents, مثل ما قلتي, like the awareness is key here because it's like don't run away from what could be. Like I feel like especially kids nowadays, and this is a big one, like this is a question that we got that we're gonna answer some of your questions later. But like one thing is like the food, right? Like the food that they eat, the ingredients, like a lot of the things, especially here in the States, like versus the Middle East, like there's been a lot of research nowadays that like links it to autism, links it to some kind of like مش disorders but انه some delays in speech or like screen time for example. So it's like don't be in denial, like it's don't just say لا خلص يلا يمشي حاله. Like ما عليه اذا بتحسي انه في شيء that maybe he's delayed in, talk about it to your doctor. Like
Yeah.
don't feel ashamed of it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most thing that may cause some delay, like nowadays, I don't know if it's food or not, but it's just the way we live now is so fast paced, and to create more time for you as a mom, you by accident have to give him the iPad for a bit or do this. But the most important part of this age is to play with the kid. That's how they learn. So the first step to learning is having attention. If you can't sustain attention to a toy long enough to learn something from it, if you're not given turn taking skills, then you don't understand that when you communicate, it's reception and expression, so having the time to expose the kid to colors and playtime, and you take a turn, I took a turn, passing the ball, the car, like vroom, peep peep,
Mm.
that's when they do their first sounds. That's when they learn, like, oh, this is fun. Like a kid can love, lipstick. You can do so much with just one toy, that once they learn to sustain attention, they learn to learn, and then they learn to pick up, they imitate you, they follow your sounds, your actions. So we just don't have time. Like life is so hard right now, life is so expensive, that people are like, should I feed my kid or play with them? You know what I mean? So I think it's important to really acknowledge the importance of play when it comes to feeding, importance of exploration, making a mess in the high chair, getting them to explore foods for
Yeah.
themselves. um as opposed to like autism, I know there's a lot of talk about like vaccinations and stuff, and honestly, me and my who the people I work with, like, we haven't really found any correlation or causation, so I can't say that there is a reason for that. But it's very much like just how the brain is developed, and certain parts of the brain are more active than others. So I would just say for anyone, play, get messy, explore, let them be curious. Moms, like, they don't like the kid to be messy at all. You have to eat clean. I feed you so you don't mess up your hand. Like, no, let them get dirty. Let them try to feed themselves. Like, that's how they learn.
I think today's day and age, and I think we've discussed this in the past on Can We Discuss as well, but I think in today's day and age as well, like with social media, you feel like moms are learning a lot of stuff on social media, but also there's a bigger platform for them to start comparing their child's development, especially when it comes to feeding and speech or language, right? With other kids that they see around them or with other parents and what they're doing for their children. How do you think this is really affecting the way parents or the way people in general are starting to be more aware or to educate themselves and how it can affect the child long term?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think social media could be your best friend or your enemy, just how
Yeah.
you use it and how much you rely on it. I think it's great that TikTok or Instagram are just giving us so much access to information, but we have a brain to be able to rationalize what makes sense and what doesn't, and to be able to reason or like critically think like, oh, okay, these seem like a good idea, but like my child, every child is
Mhm.
different. Like I can never give you one blanket statement as to you should eat this or he should learn this. Every child is so unique that you can have general information on certain things, but knowing that, like, if you want the right answer, the child needs to be evaluated on who he is and meet him where
Mhm.
he is, you know?
And like you said, as a mom or as a parent, follow your gut. You know your kid more than anyone.
And also, just like bear in mind that when you have a prime feeling of something, you prime your brain to Google search exactly the answer you want. That
Yeah.
you like, if you want to know if something is good for you and it's horrible for you, you will find the article that says it's great for you. Like on TikTok now, I'm scrolling through how like the carnivore diet is the best thing ever, but no, the vegan diet is the best thing. And I could argue either one, you know? So if you want to look for something and you have a primed answer already, you will write the words that fit your decision already.
Yeah.
That's so true, عن طب if you were to think of like مثلا top three things that I need to be looking at with my kid to understand if that's a sign that I need to talk to my pediatrician يعني قبل ما أنا أروح أحكي مع an SLP نحن قلنا we have to point things out to my pediatrician. What are some things that I need to be looking for?
So في كتير يعني there's a lot of things, but I would say generally I would say if your kid like is responsive to the environment, like if he responds to his name or to a loud noise, eye contact, you know, being able to notice someone in the room or being able to look you in the eye, and then just being able to play with sounds. I know a lot of kids come to me with speech delay. They're not saying words, but the whole time they're playing or living, they have the pacifier. So how are they going to have the chance to babble and raspberry and explore sounds if it's in their mouth all day and they are accommodated? Like some parents be like, oh, when he puts his arm up, it means he wants milk. So why put the effort in actually asking you for milk if you know me doing
Interesting.
this? Yeah, so you have to make them work for it a little bit. Oh, you want milk or juice, you want this or that. So you want to be like, you want to be able to comfort them a kid, but you want to know that they should actually put a little more effort in being able to communicate reciprocally. So I would say responsive to the environment, responsive to a partner, either like eye contact, and then just being able to explore sounds,
Mhm.
reaching, pointing.
That's interesting. And I know we said that like every child has their own like needs to be evaluated on their own like where they're at right now. صح انه مش كل الولاد بيحكوا على السنتين او مش كل الولاد يعني whatever. But is there a point in time like an age limit that is more of like the more sensitive age or not really?
Um, so I want to say 0 to 3 is crucial, but I know there is research that like males usually develop later, so around
Mm,
3. But again, it's so spread out.
yeah.
But I would say that like the kid has to be able to communicate. So even if not words, just being able to send a message with his hands takes you to what he wants. So we believe in like total communication. So being able to send
Mhm.
it through eye contact, body language, gestures. But I would say for speech, like I would say the earlier the better, but like not too early where by one they should have one word, maybe 5 words. By two, they could say like, more please or blue car, like 2 word phrases, 3 word
Mm.
phrases. By three, you should be able to like say a few words, the ones that are functional to the home, like your pet's name, your favorite juice, but it's so different. It depends on the exposure they had as well. um
Yeah.
Speaking of, I'm just gonna plug in that like teaching kids languages does not delay them. Kids can absorb up to 5 before the age of 5. So
Mm.
for them, it's just added vocabulary. As their brain develops, they know how to cognitively like code switch languages. So, masalan, if you learn car, then you just have more vocabulary, learning that car is carro, is voiture, is arabia. It doesn't, it actually gives them more options as opposed to
Okay.
confuses them. And then as they
Yeah.
grow, they learn, oh, this
Interesting.
is the girl that I say carro to, so I'm going to speak Spanish to her. So learning more
Interesting.
languages doesn't cause any delay. بالعكس, I think it just gives them more information to absorb and more vocabulary.
I love that. That's like a myth buster لأنه الناس بيفكروا إنه لا لحظة خليني أركز عليهم على الإنجليزي قبل ما أعلمهم العربي مثلا or vice
Yeah.
versa.
And I mean, if you live in a country where that doesn't speak your home language, we always say like speak your native tongue at home, because they
At
will
home.
receive English at the park, in the supermarket, at school. So they
Yeah.
will learn it either way, but speak the language of your tongue at home.
But also, Shirina, I think there's something that I've heard, and I think a lot of parents are doing that now. If a couple is bilingual, so the mom speaks Arabic, the dad speaks Spanish, for example, or whatever, vice versa, بصيروا انه the dad بس بيحكي مع الولد in Spanish والام بس بتحكي مع الولد in Arabic. So الولد بيصير يعرف انه with the mom I have to speak in Arabic, with the dad I have to speak in Spanish, for example. And this helps them develop their language skills. Is this scientifically backed?
I would say yes. And I also think that my only recommendation, like if you live in a multilingual home, is just finish the sentence in one language. So they learn the
Mm.
sentence structure of each language and they learn the grammatical placements. Yani, I know that one language will have noun, verb, object, others will have object, verb, noun. Like, so you want to say the whole sentence in the same language. So they learn the syntax of the language.
That's interesting.
Okay.
That's really interesting, Amjad. So I think one other thing is like I want to try to understand is how do you, as parents, like I know you talked a little bit like the importance of play and the importance of kind of like مالي يعني take your time. You don't need to rush through everything. يعني أنا دايما بقول إنه ما في شيء حرزان بالحياة. Like there's no reason for us to be rushing. What is outside of that, what's the best way parents or caregivers can support children who have now been identified انه صار عندهم speech and language challenges?
Yeah, so now yani, you don't have to play with the kid all day. Obviously, like, I think if you have a 15-minute good playtime, better than 3 hours of just like empty playtime.
Yeah.
So you don't have to feel like you have to take, hours out of your day. But I think if that's not super possible, and again, I understand that life is hard. People have three, four jobs, we're not judging.
Yeah.
But you could enroll them in music class. Libraries around here have like kids time, have art classes for kids. I would just see if you can expose them, take them to the park. I know a lot of patients I saw during COVID were hiding for 2 years, and they were exposed to masks. So I don't know if it's really like, I don't think we have enough research now because it's recent, but it would make sense that if they weren't seeing anyone else and when they were out they did not see any lips moving, it would make some sense maybe that there has been just lack of exposure. I'm not saying it caused anything. I don't know scientifically, but I would assume that there was just lack of exposure, which would be, a factor. I would say like speech therapy is super effective, and I would just know to be patient because it takes time. If you have a broken leg, badshar, like it heals, but you need to do PT and you need to do the homework at home as well. You need to go to the gym. Like language
Yeah.
and speech is in the brain, so it's hard to see, but it's still working on its own. It's neurons firing and access pathways. So you want the child to have like speed dial access to able to communicate in one way or the other, but it takes time. Yani, I see kids maybe for years and then they're done, or 6 months or 5 sessions. So you have to ask the questions like, what is your household like? What are his hobbies? What does he like to play? So every child is different, but being patient and just meeting the child where they're at and knowing that you have resources is, I think, like top one. recommendation that I have. And
I
don't
like that. I
compare.
like that piece of advice.
Yeah. And
Don't compare with anyone. Your child is your child, your household, everyone is different.
it's a completely different environment. Yeah, it's
So
very
different.
unique. Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to like a few things about you personally, Shirina, before we dive into some of the questions that we got from Instagram so we can answer all of your questions on here. But you guys might not know, or you'll discover after the episode if you don't know Shirina just yet. On her page, Shirina is actually now a yoga instructor. And I think that that's so interesting. And I've attended her class, and I think like just I don't think anyone who doesn't know you like or doesn't know your backstory can ever tell that like, oh, this is someone who you know struggled through speech and had a stutter growing up. And so I think that that's like very, very inspiring, honestly. And I know that your whole journey kind of has influenced your approach to self care and just like mindfulness. And anyone who knows her, like she does like yoga retreats in Bali. She has one coming up in Morocco if anyone wants to join that one. Um, but I want to understand is like, how does that influence your approach as a speech language pathologist? Like, how do you feel? Like, do you think that that's helped you in terms of like patience or influenced your path as a
Yeah.
speech language pathologist?
It's a great question. So I was actually introduced to meditation during my fluency program, and I was young. Like we did meditation every morning. And at the time, I just loved music and moving. Like I didn't really think too much. I didn't do yoga for like that reason, but it ended up giving me way more than I asked for. I just loved. I went to a yoga class here, and it was hip hop yoga. And my
How does
dad,
that work?
honestly, okay, I'm not gonna lie. Like my dad's like, all right, when are you gonna stop dancing? Cause Khalas,
But
you're
that
too
helps
old,
you,
and like
right?
culturally, we can't. Like no more. So I was like, sure. How about hip hop yoga? Like, does that work? It's just a vinyasa flow with like very loud music, dark room, and I was in a state of trance. Like I went somewhere else, and I was like, I don't know what this was, but I've never felt high like I did here. I want to teach whatever that was. And I just wanted to teach. Like I was so inspired by the whole idea and the community. It was like 80 people in the room. I'm like, oh my God, loving this. And after my speech therapy program, like I came back to Cairo after like spending 4 months here, a new person. And all my jobs require public speaking. Like first I worked in TV as like a broadcaster, and then I worked for the Associated Press, what to Saud of Masr, and then I came here, I became a therapist. So I have to be like the biggest example of good therapy, right?
Yeah.
And then I started
But this
teaching
goes back
yoga.
to all the work that you said. You said it's communication is from all angles. It's not just
Exactly.
using your mouth. So that really pinpoints it really drills down your point that communication can happen in all forms, and you need to
Exactly.
actually, parents need to encourage it.
Yeah, like I teach yoga right now as it's kind of my art form. Like I
Mm,
create an experience. It's very spiritual, but it's very physical. It's very cerebral. Like you have to think and be so present,
yeah.
be so aware with your body, have proprioception, which is like knowing where you are in space. Um, and in some way, it just rewired my body composition in a way where I'm able to just kind of use my strategies better. And
Mm,
I just feel like it makes me more aware and mindful of things.
you
And
did.
I want to add one thing as well is like her classes are actually amazing. Like I cried at the end of
And
my
I
first
sing.
class. And she sings 100% like, and I think it's beautiful that like I would want if I were to have a child who needs an SLP, like I would want someone who has had that experience, who can really like genuinely put yourself in my child's shoes and understand the struggles, understand the fact that they probably don't understand what's going on, don't understand that there's an issue maybe up until a certain age, yani obviously.
Yes.
But إنه هن they're just trying to be themselves, and it's beautiful, I think, that you're able to like share that journey with us as well.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing too. the mental journey too. Like I suffer a lot from anxiety and self-doubt, and just that comes with the territory. And I feel like people who just treat stuttering as a mechanical deficit and not look at the human factor of being nervous or being anxious or wanting validation. Like I had to work, or I'm currently working so much on my mental strength, and like I'm doing martial arts because like I need thicker skin. I am extremely sensitive, and I think I just have a lower threshold to triggers, but because of how my brain is wired as someone who stutters, that it's so important to add that, you know, your mental health comes number one. And I don't think, even if I had all the strategies, if I
Mm.
didn't work on the other factors that may impact it, it would have been much harder. And I think just having that mental awareness is so important for everyone. And no, to use my handicap, it was literally like I wasn't myself. Like I wasn't making jokes. You know, انت عارفة إنه
I
I
can't even
love,
imagine that.
like,
Like, I can't even imagine
I'm
not
so
you, Hella.
sarcastic. I have quick comebacks, but it wasn't showing out. Also, just to use my handicap as a strength and just kind of kick it in the butt just feels, for me, it's always a reminder when I'm feeling down and dubious of myself. I'm like, okay, remember like how much you work. Like you put in the work. It's fine to be okay now. You
Yeah,
know, just okay.
yeah.
A huge testament to all the work that you put in, not just to kind of develop yourself with the speech, but in general to make sure that holistically your body is helping you get over it. So that's a huge testament to the work that you did on yourself and the work that you do as a therapist.
Yeah, and honestly, just making friends too took so much time because I was bullied as a child, that, and like I always had issues speaking up for myself, that now I really foster my community and like my
Hmm.
friends, and I just appreciate communication so much more now.
It's so important. And anyways, like me and Yad have talked about this, but like in this day and age, with the so much distractions that we have in our world, with how fast paced everything is, like it means that much more when you do foster relationships and when you are putting that effort from both sides. We got a little bit derailed
Communication
there,
is
but
key.
but
Communication is absolutely key.
yeah, it is key, honestly. But we are now going to be answering some of the questions that came through. هلا already نحنا we touched on like three of the questions that I have here, so I'm not going to go back. But please, if anyone has any additional questions, like feel free to drop a comment or reach out to Sharina directly on her page. I'm going to start. We got a few of feeding questions, which I think that's cool because obviously you're a feeding and swallowing specialist. So the first question I'm going to ask is, how do I teach my 14-month-old to sip from a straw cup?
First of all, I love the straw. I don't like sippy cups. I don't think that it offers like the natural sucking progression to an open cup because it requires a lot of more jaw. So good for you for doing the straw cup. What I recommend usually is to get a honey bear cup or any type of cup that you can squeeze and help them find the suction. And what I usually do is I'll start with some thickened liquid. So if he loves purees, you can add his favorite and some water, and then I'll dip the rim of the straw in that flavor. So he's like, once you place it in his lip, not too far in, he will immediately find the urge to seal and suck that flavor. And then he'll learn that he was able to also, you know, extract from the cup, and you can help them a few times. If that wasn't enough, reach out to me and we can go over it
That's
more.
so
But any
interesting.
kind of cup that you can offer help and feedback. So, oh, every time I seal my lip and do this, I receive more. So let me do that again and again. So it's kind of like learn slash trick.
That's interesting. Okay. Another one is how to encourage a baby slash toddler to hold and use the spoon.
I love co-feeding, and what co-feeding is that the you should give the child some stuff on his tray, including a spoon or chewy tube or like a teether cracker. And as he works on development of skill and self-feeding skills, you can work on calorie intake. So have them have the opportunity to feed themselves and learn, and you can like help them with hand on hand, but they will learn eventually that this spoon I dip in like my yogurt and eat it. So he works on skill and you work on nutrition. So I am a big fan of co-feeding, is what it's called.
Okay, interesting. We can dive deeper into that, or you can dive deeper into that. When should I consider seeking help from a SLP for feeding issues? What are the red flags? I'm assuming this is with like a newborn, right?
So it's okay. So there are like two things. If your child is like choking a lot or has a lot of respiratory issues and you think that they're always wet or gurgly, I would seek immediate attention just because that impacts the lungs. So, like in a health manner, you don't want them to aspirate too much. So that could be an infant, it could be from a straw. Usually it's because the straw is too fast or the nipple is too fast. But if you're not sure, I would seek help. A lot of the times feeding issues stem from like sensory, so they're aversive to touch or they don't like certain textures. So I would do a lot of sensory play, or if you feel like your kid is beginning to get picky and not open to exploring, again, until you find an OT as well can help, but a feeding therapist that can help him desensitize, I would offer him the chance to play and explore different textures. I always say, like, if your child is comfortable touching something, they will be open to eating it. So if you skip the hands and go to the mouth right away, they are alarmed that their sensory system gets super defensive. So if they're being picky, I would reach out to a speech feeding specialist or an OT, so an occupational, and you can start to work on exploring textures.
It's so interesting you said about picky eaters. I'm gonna like talk about one thing here separate from the questions. مثلا أنا بحس إنه my parents were like my mom specifically, love you مهموها, was like a picky eater. So نحنا كبرنا only being exposed to things that she loved, صح؟ وحسيت إنه أنا صرت I adopted what she loves. هيدا كمان شيء كتير مهم، صح؟ To make sure إنه أنت as a parent you're not mirroring what you don't like in front of your kids, right? Is that something that like I'm imagining? But like now I'm so much more open, and now we're opening her up as well to like more stuff.
Yeah, I feel like kids become picky either because lack of exposure or actually being force fed. So I have a friend who, and if she's gonna watch this, she knows exactly what she is. She was force fed so much, and you're like, الأكل هيجري وراكي, you have to finish, you have to eat. That
We
now
were forced fed too.
she's so defensive as to what she eats that she's created boundaries for herself in regards like her menu. But it wasn't until she got married and her husband is like loves to eat that he was like, all right, we're gonna have to like explore some foods together, like you can't ask for pane everywhere you go. So either, yeah, you want to be exposed, and like no kid is forced to love everything, but they have to be willing to try. Like you don't have to make kids love something. Like خلاص, if he's tried it 3, 4, 10, 100 times and is open to try it, there's no need for him to love it. خلاص مش بالعافية.
Yeah.
But just having that exploring, like I always use this. You can, if it's inappropriate, you can cut it out. But the Hitch movie, and you know how
Yeah.
his advice was to, like, when you're about to kiss someone, like, go 90% and let someone come 10%.
Let them
This
come
is
in the
the same
pen.
with feeding. Like, you offer 90% of the way, and if they have consent, they will come 10, open their mouth, and take it. But force feeding is the worst thing ever. Don't force feed your kid.
Don't force feed your kids. Last question that we have is, can screen time impact a child's speech development?
This is very tricky because, again, you can do it where it's good and then do it where it's hypnotizing. Screen
Hmm.
time, there are a lot of shows now that are very educational TV information. I find that kids who do a lot of screen time just receive and don't express. So then I love
Interesting.
interactive shows where even if they're like, what is this? And they have to say, like, red train. So,
Yeah.
when there's some interaction, I think it's fine and it's like it's multi-sensory, especially if you're with the kid and being like, oh look, it's the red train. But if you're hypnotizing the kid to just receive information, then you definitely want to limit how much of that, because then they don't understand reciprocation. When it comes to feeding, some kids are so overstimulated that they need a simple distraction on the tray
Hmm.
to keep them in the chair. And you can use it as like, all right, if you want more, take a bite, then more. So we use it as some form of
Interesting.
bargain of
Incentive.
like, if you do, like, I'll do what you want when you do what I want. And it's not bribing, it's bargaining, it's meeting halfway, because you won't force feed them, they will take the bite, but you're
Okay.
using it as just enough of a distraction to keep them in the chair and at least eat like half of his meal, a quarter of his meal. And then, like, if khalas they're done, you say, okay, one more and then all done. Like, I will listen to you because you did so good listening to me or trying. So depends what screen time, and the more interactive, the better, I would say.
I feel like I'm seeing a lot of parents nowadays going back to like old shows like Barney. We used to love Barney. Like, why is Barney not around anymore? We used to like يعني عم حسن انه كتير عم يرجعوا على like old shows, like shows from the 90s, because they're like less stimulating than shows that are like مش less stimulating in a bad way, but like in a way where it's like they're interactive and engaging, but they're not like
They're simple.
they're simpler. Interesting stuff. Wow. All I can say is moms, dads, caregivers, anyone, you're doing an amazing job. Like, whatever you're doing the best that you can. Don't be so hard on yourself. Just make sure that, again, like, you are aware of like what the signs are, how you can support your child. Don't shy away from acknowledging that there could be something. And you have like great people in the world that are like dedicating their lives seriously to like helping your child through these things, so like don't shy away from it.
There are some questions that we still haven't answered, but Sharina is going to answer those separately as well. Just
Yes.
rest assured, all of your questions are going to be answered.
Yeah.
And I think, Sharina, thank you so much, first of all, for sharing what you went through so openly, honestly, and showing people how communication is really not just the words coming out of our mouths. It's also really linked to our bodies, our movements. And I think that's why it's become even a bigger thing, sign language. And I think it's just reading the body cues when a person is speaking is very important. I love how you said that is part of the communication. So if your child is doing that, but they still are not speaking with words, that's fine as long as they do have those cues. So I think it's
Yara, I
very,
think you
very
touched on
interesting.
something so important. I just want to say, yani, first of all, it was so fun being here. I feel like I could stay here all day. Um, but yes, a lot of parents shy away from teaching sign language because they think it'll like take away from words, but it's actually a supplement that'll only get them closer to speaking. So you don't want them to get super frustrated and like if you want something you have to say the word. No, if you just communicate
Yeah.
and da bigib da bigib da. So sign language is like everyone knows more and all done, like it just brings them closer to understanding, oh, when I do something, it's cause and effect. When I
Yeah.
cause something, I receive an effect. So be open to all communication pathways or modalities. So I think that's something you said that parents really need to hear. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for everything that you said today.
It was so amazing
Oh,
having
thank you.
you here. So thank you so
It was
much for
my
like
pleasure.
being
It was
open.
amazing. And stay tuned. We might have another episode with Sharina with more questions, exploring
Maybe we just
other
answer
things as well.
questions next
So
time. Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. It was an
thank
honor.
you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. As always, please make sure to leave any comments, any questions you have below, and we'll see you right back here in a few weeks now. It's every other week on Can We Discuss with Yara and Petra. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It feels good to be
Bye.
back.
Yes,
Bye.
feels amazing. Bye.